didn't know tomorrow is Juneteenth, and Juneteenth isn't just a day off. It's a day for us to remember, reflect, rejoice, have a good time. And I'm so excited today because I have Christian Simone with me. She is an incredible person, an MSW. She also is part of our healthcare worker solidarity group. So I'm excited to be able to give her like an opportunity to talk more about what she does, how she feels. Before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about what Juneteenth means and what it's about if you don't know. So Juneteenth commemorates the end of chattel slavery in the United States, and it has been celebrated in Black communities since 1866. It's one of the oldest Black American holidays and traditions in this country. And this is also a reminder of the arduous struggle for freedom in the United States. Black Americans have had a pivotal role in pretty much making sure that America lives up to its, infomercial of the American dream. Like, are you really trying to be free? What is this about? Right. And we see this time and time again over the years. And we're living through a moment right now of a lot of political and economic uncertainty. I don't have to tell y'all twice. And our country has been pretty much shaped by contradictions. And I think one of the things to really think about as we have this discussion about Juneteenth is that the United States wouldn't exist as it is today as a superpower, as one of the wealthiest nations on planet Earth, if it wasn't for the history of the dispossession of indigenous peoples' lands in this country, and then the stolen labor of Black Americans who were Africans becoming Black Americans and becoming what this nation really is today, right? Especially and particularly in the South, because that's where Juneteenth is from. It's from Texas. Okay. And at Debt Collective, I want to remind y'all that the reason we're having this conversation is that we want debt abolition, right? We want access to education that's not just free, but also freeing. And having these types of conversations is important because, as we notice, there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of lies being told about our history. There is a concerted effort by the right to tell a different story about what America is about. And this is really important that we really push back against those narratives and we spread as much information as we possibly can. So today we're going to have this conversation. Later, there's going to be a bunch of different links that you could use to educate yourself. So tomorrow isn't, again, just about celebrating and having a nice day off. It's also a time for us to reflect. So you can use those links and that information to educate yourself. Okay, cool. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Christian. Like I said before, she's a student debtor. She's a member of our healthcare solidarity group. She has a master's in social work degree, and we're going to talk about Juneteenth. How's that sound, Christian?
I'm ready.
Oh, I forgot to say, she's a Texan. She's a Texan. Okay. So as a Texan, what are some of your fondest memories of Juneteenth? I want to remind people Juneteenth is also described as Jubilee Day. And for those that don't know, Jubilee is described in the Old Testament as a period in which all debts were forgiven. Canceled is what we like to say because he didn't do anything wrong. Jesus paid it all, right? And enslaved people were freed. And society was kind of given this opportunity for renewal. So what does Juneteenth mean to you, and what were some of your experiences growing up?
So, being from the South, being in Texas, very much the Bible Belt, Juneteenth for me as a little kid was just like a day that my grandma would cook nice fried chicken. We have watermelon because it's summertime. And it's just kind of like hearing the older Black people talk about their freedoms and just kind of having some like relaxation. But that was Texas. That wasn't something like if I brought it up to some other people outside of Texas, they would look at me like I was crazy. Like, what is that? And so growing up, that was just kind of like I don't know. I thought it was just like a regional thing for a very long time because it was just something Texas. It wasn't something on the map. Now, fast forward to 2020, 2021, I had moved to Minneapolis, and 2020 definitely being a very volatile year for everyone involved. And then I started seeing Juneteenth coming up as a potential holiday. And it was just kind of like, this is kind of crazy that something like, okay, this is something I did in my neck of the woods. Now it's going to be basically a United States, like actual recognized holiday for everyone. And it left me very intrigued, but also wondering like, okay, is it going to be how when let's say President's Day, if you're off for President's Day, you're not really commemorating President's Day. It's just a day off. It's like, okay, cool. I don't have to go in that day. And to me, with the significance of this holiday and with the current culture and just kind of climate of society, it made me kind of question, will this holiday become diluted because now it's being done on a larger scale? I think for those here in the Southern Belt, especially Texas, it's something that is a really huge,
Mm.
important thing. And then being in Minneapolis, I kind of observed groups there that really did their due diligence of educating themselves, having a lot of educational events around the holiday. So that to me was great, but I also look at just the collective. Are we, is it just going to be another day off? Which I don't think having time off is a bad thing. But the reasoning for this to even occur, like looking at the history, understanding why it even had significance, is like that part is extremely important. And I just hope that it doesn't get diluted.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Like the differences between it being something that's regional, something that's celebrated in Texas, and going across the nation. Here in Oakland, California, we do have celebrations, and I think it's a time to celebrate also Southern culture, Black American culture in general. Everyone loves Black American culture, but we also need to love Black American people as well. So I think that's a big component, and not just like in a kind of vague sense, but really in terms of talking about some of the real issues and the problems that our country still needs to contend with and fix. And I wanted to talk too about your experiences and the disconnect between what we're taught in American history and the reality of what it took for Black Americans and all basically everyone in the United States to get closer and closer to that actual dream of freedom. And one example I think that isn't talked about at school enough is after, okay, let's take it back. Black folks formerly enslaved find out that they're free, rejoicing, celebration, so many opportunities, so many things that could have happened, reconstruction, right? And one of the things that really impeded upon reconstruction rather, actually being enacted was sharecropping, which is a form of debt peonage. I don't know if folks have seen Sinners. It's set in that just entire system of sharecropping, which kind of reinstates the system of slavery in a new form. And I was wondering, how do you see some of the contradictions between what's told in history or in school rather, and the reality of the history?
So for me, I have like a very out there view on it. So I look at how history is taught, and it kind of reminds me a bit of my MSW. So for those that don't know, MSW is is a master's of social work, and I focused in on the macro. So think of systems, structures, things of that sort. There is a notion like the word professional. The root of where professionalism is in supremacy mind. So when you think about who has the power of written word, that's why the history is so diluted or has been tainted so grossly. Because if a person doesn't have the education and they're only being fed one thing, this is what they're going to understand and know. And then it makes it a little bit more difficult for people when something does come out like, hey, actually, it's this. It makes people kind of recoil and say, well, no, my history book said X. And so then it makes it very hard when you do get hit with that truth. People can be a little bit disoriented to the fact that I've been lied to my entire life. And when you really dig into the history and just how innocuous a lot of things were done, the sharecropping. So yes, while a person in this jubilant state thinking that I am going to be seen as a human, in actuality, laws and policies were done in such a way to make it that there was a moving target. You couldn't quite be just right. Every time you thought you had it, there's something else that is in the way to impede on you being able to be seen as a human. And so our history, like there's certain parts, if you really get into it, like the South versus the North. The North, there was a heavier focus on education and integration, whereas the South, it was a lot of like ignorance, and that was seen as pride. I mean, even in the Bible, if you were to go like the King James version, there's some verses in there that says, "Be good slaves to your owners." And if you think of it, especially being in the South, church and religion, is such a heavy, heavy way of respite. And so if you're in a lot back in my history or researching of history of slavery, is that a lot of slaves would use church as a way, as an outlet to be able to have some time to be themselves. Like in the South, when you go to church, it's an event. Easter Sunday is like Vogue. It is a big event. Well, that stems back to the slavery time, because that was one time you got each week to put on your non-slave clothes. And then it's being very much subtly, innocuously put into you that to be a good slave is to own and listen to your owner. Um, and so that history, it is so embedded that when we do start to see things and really see like, okay, these laws were done in such a intricate way to make it to where you will never ever to be free. And now moving it to society today, I look at student loans as the modern day slavery, because for a lot of, especially for Black people, you've been told all your life that you go to get good grades, go to school, and if you do that, you'll get a good job, and then you will be able to be seen as a human. There's like respectability politics. And I got to be a part of a research paper where the emphasis on the research was how middle class Black women who are like trying to either be in middle class, how they see themselves. And most of the research showed that they could not see themselves as middle class because of some of this history of never being enough, never having enough, and then always having to try to pull up others in the process.
Wow. Thank you so much for bringing that up and drawing all those important parallels, because we also need to remember, I feel like slavery is often posited as like this distant thing that happened so, so long ago. And in actuality, like you were saying, there's a lot of ways that it rears its ugly head in different capacities through laws and restrictions and regulations. And I think one of the things we have to name in terms of education is that Black Americans' ancestors were barred from accessing education, right? Brutalized for reading books. I mean, you could be put to death. Very severe punishment. And also, as you mentioned, with church being such an important component of the experience of people and how they were able to rejoice and be themselves. Also, being able to read the Bible was such a big part of that too, right? And so that was probably one of the first texts that people were able to read and to understand and to be like, wait, and ask questions. And so let's keep talking about this topic, especially about student debt in particular, right? And thinking about education becoming a commodity, the idea that in order to get education has to be a return on investment. You have to get educated so you can get a high paying job. And let's talk about what the job market, what the labor market really is like for Black women. Women make 61 cents on the dollar for every dollar a white man makes. So that's a loss of $1 million over the course of their careers. So it's kind of a catch-22, because people are like, well, you shouldn't have gone to college. Black women are getting all these degrees. They're so educated. But if you don't have an education, you're locked out of higher wages. You're locked out of healthcare sometimes. But then we have this debt. So can you talk a little bit about why it's important to understand the student debt crisis through the experiences of Black women?
So, growing up for myself, it was, you have to get an education. I was always told very roughly that I was going to be essentially the ticket out of poverty. And so getting an education was important. And the way I grew up, it was not a very conducive home. And I remember placing myself in it was a free school, but you had to apply to get in. And I knew that the kids that would be there were going to be kids that were very much unlike me. They came from parents that had money, and this was all ethnicities. It was like the United Nations for teens. And I was going to be at least exposed to people who had parents had been to college, had done the things, had nicer things than what I came from. And so I had to work. And I look at when I think about the student loan debt, I look at the fact that I've been working since I was probably about 8 or 9 illegally and then 15 legally. And a lot of that was because I needed to pay my way to get to this school because I didn't have family that was supportive of me becoming educated. So I had to work and push. I had a few instances in high school where I essentially, my body just maxed out. And I was out for a week because I was just beyond exhausted. But in my mind, it's like if you can just keep pushing, you'll get to college. And if you can get to college, then, your grades are good, you'll be good. And I was able to get in. I am a very much a first gen on any way that there is a thing possibly to be a first gen, like going to high school, graduating high school, having a driver's license, anything possible. That would be me. And so I get into college. There is no support. There is nothing. You are, young and having to make these decisions and just the being succumbed to all the overwhelm of being in college. I had an incident, and that incident destroyed all my grades, which means all accesses to scholarships and all of that went away. And then the compounding of I need to finish my degree because again, the goal is as a Black woman, you are nothing without having a piece of paper. Your value is based on how many degrees you have behind your name. And I see this a lot in academia where it's, well, I have my doctorate. That is wonderful. And if it is for the pursuit solely of education and advancing whatever modality you want, it's wonderful. But oftentimes, very unconsciously, we're pursuing this because we want to actually be treated as human. And so by having this degree, now I am now seen as someone worthy, deserving of being respected and be calling like my name, ma'am. And we do so much. And so I look at my now 170K that hasn't been capitalized on since this new master's degree. And it's like, okay, so as much as I have this piece of paper, I am still almost imprisoned in my life because I'm not able to actually choose what I want to do. I have to go pursue, as you said earlier, what's going to be the best on return investment. Having all these degrees is wonderful, but the debt that no one talks about because there's so much shame and embarrassment about it, it inhibits you from truly, I feel like, self-actualizing. Like I think about how it impacts your health having that over your head. I mean, there's so many years of life that I have not lived because I was working 2 jobs, trying to pay debt, and then eventually getting to a point where I couldn't keep up and almost careened in with a tour bus at midnight trying to get to a night job. And I ended up having to stop and then couldn't continue paying student loans. And 2020, that break of pause was like a breath of fresh air because it was like, whoa, I actually do know how to manage my money. If I didn't have student loan debt, like this could be my life. I could actually think of the future. I could think of a business. I could think of what I really want to do and give to the world. And it's one of those, you can be proud of what you've accomplished, but then there is the back end of the student loans and then how that impacts where you get to live, your retirement, if you can even think about retirement. Again, I talk about the health because I look at for Black women, oftentimes we are heavier. And a lot of that heaviness isn't just a lack of exercise or accessibility to healthier foods. It's a lot of that is stress, inflammation, and then how that impacts your heart and everything else that you do. And just being able to enjoy life. One of the things I remembered very poignantly from the research paper I got to work on is one lady's interview stating that she was having to go on antidepressants because of one, the student loans, and then she's also having to be the supporter of the family. That's the thing with Black women. We often are that matriarch for the family, like, oh, you went to college, you can give me some money. or I can stay with you and you can help me. And that's extra load. And she's like, I would love to know how it feels to go on a date, but I don't have the energy to go and like tend to things that I normal people get to go do everyday things because of that heaviness and weight of, being that college educated Black woman.
Wow, you just brought up so many important points, Simone, and I just really appreciate you for saying that because it doesn't get talked about enough. Nearly enough. And I think that what you're mentioning and what when Black women speak up about that, it also starts to create a ripple because other people start to understand, wow, I'm experiencing this too. Like, why is this happening? Start to ask questions and start to push back. You brought up the payment pause, which I love that you did, because I think you can tell me what you think about this, but one of the things I noticed about the payment pause was everybody started to understand the federal government doesn't even need these student loan payments. The sky isn't falling. Um, this pause is happening. I finally don't have to throw money at this bottomless pit. And I think that that also is indicative of student debt doesn't have to exist. Student debt is a discipline. Student debt in the 1950s, colleges in California were free, albeit for wealthy white men. Um, and then as the integration started happening, as colleges started to diversify, as more Black women started attending, more first generation, but also more working class white folks, the college campuses not only became more politicized, but also new fields of study were being introduced. Remember, we talked about that college not just free, but freeing. All of a sudden, people were like, well, we want Black studies. We want to know about our history. We want to learn about Juneteenth. We want to learn about the long arc of history of what people have done to fight back. And Ronald Reagan built his whole entire political career, former governor of California, off of vilifying those students. And he even said taxpayers should not subsidize intellectual curiosity. He straight up said, this is going to be a problem. We got to make sure that people don't get free education. And so, as you were mentioning, how Black women are getting more and more degrees because they believed in the premise that education would provide access because it's supposed to. I think that it's really a stain on our society in general, and we can learn so much by listening to Black women. And so, a question I have for you is, how do you think that student debt influences the careers that people pursue, and the risks that they take? Can you talk a little bit more about that, especially with your background in social work?
Sure. So I will say kind of a twofold. You either have those that go into roles such as I need to be an attorney or a doctor. And I've heard this from other ethnicities where it's like you're going to college, but your choices is you're going to be an attorney or you're going to be a doctor, as
Yeah.
really, or an engineer. Like those are the only three that some of other ethnicities, families even understand. So you're saying, I'm going to go pursue becoming a teacher. What? That's not even, that's not here. And I think for some Black women, they go after the degrees that could be much more high lucrative positions because again, a lot of them, like I am a first gen, and for some years I was having to take whatever money I had to help the family. And so if you get to become this attorney, it's almost like, oh my God, like the family gets to see like like you're their trophy. And you get to be like the herald of look at my baby. They're this big shot attorney and you're making the money, you're, being able to have a life. Then there's another side of it that I see, which is a lot of Black women go into these, like they see the need in society, in the world. And Black women often have this, I say, kind of an inherited, not all, but quite a few, this kind of healer mentality that I want to help better the world. I see a problem and I'm going to solve it by helping and supporting. So then I look at social work. The profession is 81% women. I forget the percentage of what it is for Black women, but there is a huge a number of Black women within this profession. With this profession having wages that are some of them starting out at 30, 40 grand a year, where your student loans is 150 plus, it just doesn't make sense. And then there's this also notion within the social work profession of licensure. So most of the profession is pushing people to become therapists, clinical individuals. Well, you have to have a license to do therapy. You can not, it's not good for you to be doing it without your licensure. Well, with the licensure, there was I want to say almost an 84% failure rate of you passing your licensure on the first time. And it costs money for you to test. and to continue to retest, which means the longer you're unable to get this license and be able to move up in rank in your role means your wages are just languishing. You're stuck in these lower end roles unless you do something else. If not, if you're going to go down that path, you're stuck not making there's a ceiling that you will be able to make just because of the licensure. And so I look at a lot of the helping professions, a lot of Black women, yes, we're well educated, but we're in these helping roles. Or even if you went into, say, some of the more like diversity, equity, inclusion, if you look at how things have rolled, there was a big proponent of Black women in those roles. And as government cuts happen, what happens? Those women are pushed out of those roles. And if they are the matriarch of their families, that then impedes the entire generation that's here because there is no income, because they are the source. And so I look at myself, I initially wanted to go when I graduated from my undergrad in 2011, I wanted to go to law school. But that was kind of in the economy boom, bust, the recession. And I was hearing Harvard law grads couldn't get a job. And I'm like, well, ooh, that doesn't sound very appeasing. And so I end up having to reroute and find what was working. What work could I get? Because I need income. And the unfortunate thing is, I feel like with student loan debt, Black women or any person at all, I feel like, especially women, just because of kind of some work that I do on the side, is that we stay in roles that are not truly beneficial to us. And it's oftentimes because of the debt that we have. If you have this debt, you need a job. And therefore, you will not pursue certain things because you need the income right now. There are opportunities that I had in my undergrad years for great fellowships or projects that would have given me light years ways of experience I couldn't take because they were unpaid. And so that inhibits, because I see some consultants coming out and they're like, yeah, I just got my MBA and I was told to charge 2K an hour. Wow. I mean, what type of quality of life okay, I even did some of the math. I'm like, okay, I could do maybe a couple of clients a month. Okay, I can make about 10, 15K a month. I think I'd be kind of cute. My health would be better. My mental health would be outstanding. And so that unfortunately just makes it to where and this is the kind of a flipper. I have encountered a lot of attorneys and doctors that are Black women, and a lot of them, they're in roles that they are not fit for.
Mm.
And that's another kind of, you're stuck. Like, yeah, I'm making 500K a year, but at the end of the day, this work is killing me physically, mentally, emotionally, but it's allowing me to have a certain lifestyle. And so, and it could be the thing that's helping me pay off my loans. And
Mhm.
so I look at it's you maybe getting to do the work that you really love, but you're not compensated for, or you're doing work that's very well paid and incentivized, but it's really actually doing more harm than good.
That's so true. It's like that's why I love this concept of debt as a discipline because it does like shape the choices and the decisions you can make. We need people in all types of fields, in all types of professions. Like it really impedes on our entire society to even have people from any ethnic background being like, "Well, I want to be a nurse because it makes more money." Well, yes, but shouldn't you want to be a nurse because you want to help people essentially? I mean, yes, it's a great job with higher on average wages than maybe let's say teachers, but we also need teachers, and our society just kind of accepts the fact that teachers don't get paid enough when it's a really important profession. Myself, I love being an educator, but I left the profession because it was just so underpaid and it's so demoralizing. And so I think you're speaking of all the different ways that student debt in particular operates in this way. It becomes this discipline. And I want to shout out to a campaign that we're working on at Debt Collective. We're actually pushing for the Trump administration to administer a pause again on student loan payments. I'll add that to the caption in this live because the entire student loan system is a shit show. If you haven't had to deal with it, I'm so happy for you, but it's basically made it's a dumpster fire by design. It's incredibly difficult to navigate. There are student loan relief programs like public student loan forgiveness. There's also borrower defense to repayment. But the Trump administration is coming after these programs, right? The Trump administration understands that debt is a discipline. The Trump administration knows that Black women are disproportionately burdened by this, that Black wealth in general is burdened by student debt. There were studies, I'm going to, again, put those in the captions. You can educate yourself on them. Protect Borrowers did a really extensive study about Black women's how they're impacted by student debt. If they canceled student debt, it would increase Black wealth overall. That's how much this is like holding people back from buying homes, from starting families. And the reason why it's important to talk about issues that impact Black Americans is because oftentimes race, especially anti-Blackness, is used as a way to take away public goods from everyone. How did they convince conservatives to go against healthcare for all? They called it Obamacare. Of course, Obamacare wasn't perfect; it had a lot of problems. But one of the ways they were like, "Oh, they associated with Obama," right? Same with student debt relief. In some ways, we talked a lot about how student debt relief would help Black people, and I felt like that was one of the reasons the American people, more broadly, didn't want it to happen. And it's like, and so that's why it's so important to talk about these issues and talk about race and know your history, because otherwise masses of people become susceptible to losing all of their rights, pretty much. Last thing I'll say too, especially for you as a Texan, I'm up here in the north, and we got all sorts of problems up here. Don't get me wrong, Cali's got a lot of problems. Um, we can learn so much from Black people's experiences in the South. Not only are they disproportionately impacted by student debt, but all types of debt, and also some of the fascistic ways that the government operates there. It's going to ripple out in other places. And we got to keep our eyes on the South, on what's happening in the South, on the ways that people are fighting back on the South. So my final question for you, and it's just been such a pleasure talking to you. I just love it so much. Is what message would you want to send this Juneteenth that people will continue on after this Friday? What message would you want to send to folks or messages?
I would say, and this is probably not going to be the most uplifting, but be grounded in understanding what you are seeing. So I feel like a lot of the pushes, like you mentioned, like a lot of the way things were perceived or marketed was done by design. So if you associate it with a certain individual group, it nullifies it out as of being beneficial. But I see a lot of it, especially like focusing on our subject, we've talked about Black women. A lot of this is very much heavily focused on it's something of the feminine, something that's very woman focused. And our society does not want there to be this level of a balancing of equality. They would prefer it not because like education beforehand was male focused. The men can do all the philosophies and we read in these books, these great philosophers are what male. Now, even I can go into the Bible, like a lot of these things were written by males, but if you really do some snorkeling, you actually get to see some of the actual women in the work that they do, but they don't want that to be readily available as knowledge because as they all say, knowledge is power.
Hmm.
But understanding the history of Juneteenth, why it is here, and understanding your position as an individual, be Black, be it that you're not, understanding that if it hurts one, it's hurting all. And I've done research where it literally, they were asking when it came like the whole health for all, and they went to some rural town in Alabama and asked this U.S. veteran that had a lot of health issues, hey, if we had this free health care, would you want that? How would you benefit from it? And his words were, well, I don't, if Blacks are going to get it, I don't want it. But he would have been the prime person to actually benefit from it. Um, and just understanding that the fact that there is such a focused drive to keep certain individuals, which essentially is everybody that is not what supremacy is focused on, male, white, heterosexual, whatever else, Christian, understand that all this is done by design. And then you need to operate in a such in a way where you are not operating in that. You need to operate out of the reality of the fact that you have an extensive amount of value. That is a way to punish. It's basically to say, hey, you weren't supposed to have this. You're not, it's like, okay, yay, you got your little degree, but I'm going to make it hell for you because I didn't want you to have it. Because what's happening is that here we are with our PhDs and master's degrees, and we're saying, well, hey, based on the statistical data, this is happening. And that's a problem because you're supposed to stay asleep. You staying asleep means things can be done the way that they want them to be done, but you can't stay asleep. You have to be awake and you have to operate in a way that is going to be strategic, but also understanding that I know I've heard for some people who don't have student loan debt or who's been able to pay their student loans off. Well, I had to do it. So why can't everyone else? But not understanding that not everyone came from the same starting mark as others. I look at myself and understanding that being super, super young, I had to do some things to make money in order to have the opportunity to go to college that no young girl or boy should ever have to participate in. That's not legal. And all my mind is, yes, I might be making myself be highly susceptible to a lot of different diseases. But at the end of the day, my goal was I deserve to go to college and I'm working hard to get that. And so now to be having 170K plus student loans and then also understanding my intersectionality, being a woman who's also Black and all these other mixtures. Don't look at Juneteenth as just a holiday to just like, okay, I'm gonna sleep in, I'm gonna, have some brewskis and, barbecue. Have fun. Please do enjoy life. But in the same breath, also understand the fact of like, why did we even have to have this? What was the reasoning for this? Like, why did this actually have to transpire? And so the fact that it was delayed here in the South deliberately, that shows you how much our powers that be will do to try to prevent knowledge awareness, because with that pause, people actually had a bit of breather. And I think to me, to some degree, that was a part of why they want to push this back onto people, because people had margin, breathing room to start to look at things. Because when you are not being pressed down by the weight of survival, you actually get to operate out of your higher levels of mindedness to actually start questioning things and to actually start to create a life that actually is truly reflective of humanity.
Absolutely. And I want to remind folks, not only is Simone absolutely correct, but also keep in mind that one of the ways that we're taught history in this weird way is we're taught history as if, oh, the people in power, Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. No, people that were enslaved fought tooth and nail. Any way that you can imagine slavery to be, it was worse than what you imagined, A. And B, slavery didn't just happen to Black folks, it was resisted by Black Americans every single day in multiple ways that maybe don't even know about. We do know of some rebellions, but the rebelliousness was constant. And so, as people that are fighting for justice in multiple ways, we can look to this history to gain inspiration and understand that freedom is a constant struggle. And yes, celebrate, but then also just keep that in mind as we go forward. And yeah, so again, thank you so much for talking to me, Simone. And
Thank
I
you
hope
for having me.
we talk again soon. And for those that are watching, please make sure you read all of the materials that I'm going to have in the captions of this live and educate yourself and join us at any of our calls at debtcollective.org/events. And happy Juneteenth. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.